think we're going to get started here. We're going to get started. It's past 11:30. 12:30. I hope everybody on Zoom can hear me and see me. I want to welcome everybody here. This is our first kickoff. Please make sure you have phones, and isn't that muted? Thank you. I thought I muted it. Oh, well, maybe we should just turn it off. You can turn it off if you have to, I guess, because I don't want there to be an echo. Thank you. Thank you. I want to welcome everybody here. This is our kickoff event for Sisterhood. We traditionally have a welcome event in the fall where we invite people in person. This year being another year of this wonderful pandemic, we're doing in person and remote. And so we're happy for everybody who's joining us either way. Last year, we were lucky enough to have Meredith Goldstein speak to us remotely. This year, she graciously accepted our invitation to come and see us in person. So we get a more complete experience. I've been a fan of Meredith's for many years, reading her columns religiously in the Boston Globe, her advice column, Love Letters. She's also the author of a recent book called Things That Grow, and what was the other one? The Can't Help Myself, which I read and I just thought was so witty, honest, and humorous about her own life, and very inspiring. Meredith's topic this year is called Things Got Weird, and it's her look of what this pandemic has done to us and what it's taught us about ourselves and social relationships. And without further ado, I'd like to welcome Meredith. Oh, and she will take questions at the end for people who are on Zoom. You can put them in the chat, and we'll have some time for a give and take at the end. Thank you.
I have to commend you on a great setup. I didn't quite know how this was going to look in a hybrid way, and this is wonderful. One of the things I've been thinking about a lot lately is how Zoom culture has made life so much more accessible for people in my life who may have mobility issues, who may actually just have kids and can't get out of the house. And I moderated a Boston Book Festival event on Friday, and I just thought, the faces that I know were on Zoom and the numbers that I know were there, these were people who wouldn't have been able to run to a bookstore or to Harvard Square and park. And so I hope what a great model for, as things continue to be weird, what a great model that we can be together in two different ways at the same time. So I was also thinking this morning that I could have named this talk I Got Weird. I was thinking of when I was asked sort of what do I want to name this, I was like, everything's just so weird right now. And I think when I spoke to you last year, it was okay, we're in the thick of this, and how are we surviving, right? Very literally, some of us in better positions than others, but no one in a good position, right? I cannot say that the pandemic was a great equalizer. If anything, it showed the massive disparities in the world, but also friends of mine who financially could afford two nannies couldn't have that nanny there, perhaps. And all of a sudden, everyone's lives became difficult in similar ways where there was loss of help, loss of community. Similarly, or I should say on the other side, there were many people, and I think I touched on this a little bit last year, although I might have been less inclined to admit it. I fell into a category of people who a few months in thought, I am very nervous and concerned for the world and getting weird. And I live alone, but there is also a part of me that is much more calm. So what is that about, right? Like, how come I feel slightly better when I think about all of the anxieties I had before COVID? It was, I'm not going to get deadlines done. I'm not going to be able to please my friends or spend time with them. I got to run and see my sister. All of a sudden I had one job, which was not to get anybody sick and to not get myself sick. And I was like, well, that just means like, there's no fear of missing out, right? Like I'm doing my job. Right. And I would like watch a marathon I got really into every procedural crime show, also like of the early 2000s, like Castle, shows like this, right? Where I was like, all I need to do is watch Castle and sit here and I'm doing my job. And there were so many people who felt similarly. So realizing this now, I am now watching a group of people in my life, and I'm sure you are as well, come out of this. And by out of this, I mean, like you're all masked or out of this in quotes. We're in a new phase of this, right? A phase where you guys can be here with masks on and the windows can be open. And what does this mean and what has happened to us? So this is not a question I can answer, by the way. And I'm assuming there are many books that will be written for a very long time about the ways that our children have been affected, the ways that I think we have no idea how much we've been changed. But I think it will be interesting to see. And I hope that some of the positives, I hope there are positives that come out of it, which is one, the first one being things that are seen that were no longer, that had not been seen before. For instance, I always got a ton of letters from my Boston Globe advice column about division of labor in households. And it was sort of subtle, right? Like, marital problems that were more about, there's a thing I can't put my finger on that I'm angry about, or that we have past resentment, and the thing wasn't said. And I hate to gender this, but and I will call it my own employer, but when I would see Boston Globe newsroom wide meetings, often women had like many people on them, right? Like they were in a Zoom and there was like a cat here and a baby here, and men were at their desk, right? At home, right? And I would say like, oh, like it wasn't always the case. And there were definitely versions of that were flipped, same-sex couple. There were all different versions of that, but predominantly, it seemed as though it even added that much more labor to women's labor. So now we know, right? I mean, now the editors at the Globe can look and say, well, I mean, I've heard so many editors say, well, I know that person has a lot going on with their mom. And, they have, this person has 2 children, like they have a lot going on. These are not things I heard. And maybe a little bit, but like, the newsroom likes to pretend that like no one should have a life. We should all just be here for news and for writing. But now it's a little bit different. In fact, I recently spoke to the editor of the Globe, Brian McGrory, and he was talking about how much time he spent on his commute. And he was like, can you believe it's like hours? And I was like, I know, right? So like, how can we do this better? So that's a piece of this. I think, what month would we have spoken last year? Same month? Same month. So I might have started to figure this out at this point, but the most common letter I received before the pandemic was dating fatigue. And I think that's something I spoke to you about, which was not at the start of the column. The very start of the column, everybody was snooping. And I think I read about that in the book quite a bit, but that everybody in the early stages of the column, which if you can date it, was 12 years ago. So 12 years ago, Twitter was new, Facebook was newer and more people used it of a certain generation. And also security wasn't as tight on this technology. And it's like every other letter I got was I hacked my partner's Facebook messages and see that they're communicating with a high school sweetheart or something like that. So it was constantly a situation where I was like, okay, well, your partner's doing a weird thing, but you did a very weird thing here. Like you're like a hacker now. Like what is, the column was constantly like, is cheating worse than snooping? Is snooping worse than cheating? And I'm like, it all seems not great, but I don't know. So that stopped happening at a certain point, or very rarely. I mean, people still snoop, but I think there are 2 reasons that there's less of that. One is that people are smarter about security, right? And the other reason is like, we all know where we are all day long. I think people figure out ways to cheat, don't get me wrong, but it is much harder to leave it's much harder to go to be nowhere, right? Like, especially if you're of a certain generation or younger, there's this expectation that you're always available by text, that you're posting pictures of your breakfast, that you're, so it's like, I don't need to know where my partner, what they're doing, because I can literally tell you what they just ate. And it reminds me of my friends who have kids in daycare, and I didn't realize how much daycare had changed, where they'll get emails all day that's like a picture of their kid doing a thing. And I'm like, this is really weird. Like, I just went to daycare or school, and my mom had to be like, I guess she's off doing a thing. But now there's like, in some cases, these schools are documenting the days of these children. And I think very much social media influences that, right? Like, so there's far less snooping involved. But right before the pandemic, single people, and this might be you, this might be relatives of yours, were feeling this exhaustion of having to be on apps all day and all night, and it fruitlessly leading nowhere, and also feeling like it could lead somewhere. So, I bring up the story a lot, but when my book came out, we had a book event. One of the book events was at the Harpoon Brewery, and it was like books and beer. And it was like a cute thing my publisher set up, and it was in the Seaport. And not surprisingly, as it happens with many of my events, even though the readership of the column is quite diverse, particularly with gender. I think I probably told you last year that the number of men who say to me, oh, well, I know I'm not your demographic, but, and I'm like, no, you're my demographic, right? Because you're all telling me this, right? Now, and I'm talking about straight cisgender men, like those men might not come to this. They might not be first in line at this event. So if you're here, you get extra points, but they are reading, right? But at that particular event, there was a young woman there who came up to me in, basically in tears. And she said, I'm just tired. I'm tired. She said, one of the reasons I came to this event was because I like your column and I want to see you, but also I thought beer, and I thought men like beer, and there are only women here, and the men who are here are boyfriends of people. So now I feel like I've wasted the evening because I couldn't be looking, and I need to always be looking because I could be on my phone right now. And I just thought, like, there were even limitations to Match.com and these early sites when they were on computers, which is that you open them, you log in, you see what messages you get, and then you turned off your account. This is like, if you're on an app, it's all day, all night. You could be doing it forever. And so many letter writers of all different ages were saying, when am I allowed to take a break? I hate this. And, I would say, like, the minute if you don't want to do it, don't do it. Like, yes, you might miss someone, but you also might miss someone if you don't go to there's that sort of advice, say yes to everything, right? That single people are often told. And I'm like, well, that's a lot of pressure. Sometimes you will be bad at going to the thing you said yes to because you were exhausted. So do not go. Like, be present wherever you are. Easier said than done. But then the pandemic started, and along with that lack of fear of missing out, there was also swiping all day and meeting up with people could be actually socially irresponsible, right? So, meeting up with some guy, especially in lockdown, right? This was suddenly not a thing to do. So, what I watched was people say, oh, I'm allowed to take a breath. And in that, they didn't necessarily get off the apps, although some did for a while, but they would have these much longer conversations. And sometimes there was a lot more empathy. They would tell me on the apps, like, how are you, meant something very different than it had before. In fact, I used to joke with my single friends that my least favorite thing was when they got messaged by a guy, how are you? Because I'm like, what a big question. I've heard from a lot of friends, like, how else do you start a conversation? But like, how am I? Like, there's a great meme from the show Broad City where she says, how am I? And that's how I feel about that question. Like, I'm great, I'm terrible, I'm exhausted, I'm worried, I'm happy, I'm, speaking in this place of all places. I think being Jewish, you were culturally capable of having such how are you is not an easy question to answer. But it suddenly felt like a real question, like that asked for a real answer. And sometimes those conversations wound up being much more meaningful. I have talking to you a year later, I am shocked and concerned and excited about the number of couples that came about during COVID, during the height of COVID. Why concerned? Um, I don't know. In the beginning, a lot of the couples who met, they met online, they took a walk, they talked about could they bubble, they took a test. I mean, these are the people who were very careful about it. And I do know a ton of people who were very careful about it. It was like that show Bridgerton was on last winter, and I would call it like the Bridgerton relationships, right? Because I felt like they like would go a walking, and then they'd like maybe there'd be a chaperone. It felt very like romance novel, historic, and they would have these long conversations over Zoom, and then maybe it's like, well, if we both get tested, could we like put our mouths close to each other? And there was something very delightful about that. But I did a story for the Globe at some point last fall about these couples. But they would admit all that they didn't know. Well, I don't know what this person is like in traffic. Are they a mean driver? Like traffic wasn't really a thing yet. Now it is. But I don't know if this person is the person who talks during the movie at the theater. I don't know if this person is introverted or extroverted. That's really interesting, right? Because you can be one-on-one with somebody and they are very different in a group setting. Some people are incredible on Zoom, and in the same way they are on social media. I have a friend who is so introverted in real life, and on social media, you would think it's an entirely different person, right? So these practical ways in which we bond or get repelled by each other, so many of these couples had no idea what their partners would be like. One in particular that in the story I reported, I should check in with them to see, because it was a straight couple, and the man said to me, she's got a million friends she can't see right now. I don't work that way. I really am like, I have a partner. I like to be home a lot. And she's home all the time with me now. And they were bubbled together. And he said, I don't know how it will feel when she lives the life she wants to live with me a part of it. I don't know like how it will feel to not have access to her in all the ways I have access to her now. She's not going to want to sit around and play 4 hours of board games every night, but that's what I want to do. So are they together? I don't know. I should check in. But there are now couples that started dating during the pandemic and are getting married or moving in with each other. And I think, the greater thing I'm learning is that I think I have approached the column and my life and my advice, at least for the first part of this, as when normal happens, this is how we'll be affected. And I am shifted my perspective to be understanding of the fact that there is no return and there is no normal, whatever that means. There is no, people like to or are likely to compare this to 9/11, even though there are very few similarities but something experienced nationally, and in this case, it's internationally, where we still have the same security setup, right, at airports. This is not something on our mind. I think about the way that was on my mind, especially because I was in my early 20s and the internet was different, and this will forever change us. But I don't know that many people are going to return to a life they had in the same way. I think it will always be on our minds. We will always think twice about sharing each other's glass. I'm watching old TV and everybody's touching things, but also it will. I have a sister who is high risk, and she has sort of a rheumatology disease, and I lost my mom to cancer. I think about illness a lot, and I speak to a room full of people who was I talking to? Oh, it was a podcast guest who said, don't you think it's interesting that he's Black? And he said, your people and my people, we have such terrible stomach problems. It's not a coincidence. I think that for a very long time, I've thought about my family and my friends and any possible health issues. And I've thought about the way that plays out and being close to them. I'm not someone who's even at a young age, I wasn't that kid who was like, well, I'm going to tour London. Like, even if I had had the money, I would have been like, but what if somebody gets sick, right? This could be a cultural thing. I don't know, of like, we will take care of the people in our lives, or the worrying, but it's also quite real, right? Where the responsibility to be close. All friends I've had who are from here, and I'm not originally from here, but they are, at some point or another in the last year, have said, why did I move? Why did I feel like I should be home? I should be closer. We all need to be close. My Aunt Nancy, who lives in Lincoln now, she used to joke, well, if the zombies come, this was pre-COVID, if the zombies come, our meeting places at the Lincoln House because it's the biggest, right? So these are the things I think about now. Like, how do we get to each other physically, and what does that take? So I think for many people who never thought about that, and especially young people, right, who might have thought, I can be anywhere and get anywhere. I can always be where I need to be at any given moment. Well, suddenly some people got stuck where they were, and some people couldn't get home. So these are the kind of things that will stick with us. Also think that the sort of reevaluating of what's important and what we're worth, what we're seeing with labor right now, the labor shortages, and I'm not a business expert, I can't speak to all of this, but what you're willing to do and give up for jobs. Like, I don't ever want to go back to a place where I sacrifice my health. I mean, I'm literally the advice columnist of the Boston Globe. I'm not saying my work is not important. It is quite important, and I believe very strongly in it. But there are moments in pre-COVID life where everything was dropped, right? Even without being asked. And I think that was a very American measure of commitment and success. And I think about all the people at the Globe who showed up dripping with head colds, because that's what you do. You go in. And that's a reporter mentality too, right? I remember when the Boston Marathon bombing happened, I immediately called the news desk and was like, what can I do? And there were a lot of people who did do plenty. And in that moment, it became clear that even though long ago I wrote news, I had become the advice columnist, because they were like, what do you think you can do? And I was like, maybe I'll just pick up some food and drop it off. But that's something, right? But like, there's a spirit of you show up no matter what. I don't want anybody coming to work sick. And now I think about all the people, that were put at risk. So I want to leave plenty of time for questions, but I want to talk about the thing that I most have noticed, the most frequent, I don't want to say concern, but question that has come up over the past few months among coupled people and to some extent single people, which is we are having to have conversations about how we run our households and rules, and the number. I could run a letter a day from a spouse who is annoyed that their spouse has a different interpretation of the house rules and the consent of what's safe, and than the other. And a lot of, gay friends I have will say it's really interesting to watch straight people have to talk about what makes them comfortable for the first time in their lives, right? That this is, and it's fair. This has been such an exercise. And at some point I was very happy that the Globe, which becomes, more open by the day to talking about the way people actually live and the way they prioritize love letters, I think is a real showing of that. I talked to a sex writer about all of the language that we can use that is normally used for sex in conversations about COVID, right? So like, one of the things she said is, people should look at each other and say, what does that look like to you? Well, what does that look like to you? So tomorrow, this is good practice for me because I'm really a shut in for the most part, but tomorrow night I'm going to a Harry Styles concert at the Garden. My friend who bought these tickets pre-COVID, who is also high risk, and she and I are both boosted at this point, but he kept postponing the tour. And for those who don't know, Harry Styles is a pop singer who was in a very important boy band. And what's very interesting, I'm 44 and I was like, I'm going to be the oldest person there, but apparently that's not the case. So he's got a lot of fans. So my friend looked at me and when we realized Harry Styles was truly coming to the Garden, and I was like, well, we're not going to, we'll sell our tickets, right? And she's like, oh no, we're going. We are going, and we will be wrapped up like mummies, and we will not drink any water, and we will sit there and we will hear Harry Styles, right? So I said to her, okay, Okay. So the first thing is I need to know that I'm not going to see my sister who's high risk around. Like maybe the garden, I think everybody's got to show proof of vaccination, but I don't know. I haven't seen it yet. So like, I don't know how it's going to feel to be there. I'm going to postpone anything I'm going to see anybody who I'm particularly worried about. But then I said, what does it look like to you? Does it look like we are allowed to have beverages? Does it look like if one of us feels panicky about it and there's 1,000 people without masks on that we're allowed to leave? What does it, these very specific things about what do we bring? When do we leave? How do we get there? And I found it really just, it shouldn't be revelatory, but it is just about coming into somebody's house and say like, is this okay? Right? Like, let's play out all the ways in which one of us could, not want to risk it all for Harry Styles, although I would risk it all for Harry Styles. So, I think that is what I'm seeing a lot is couples having a difficult time constantly shifting the rules and talking to their children, and in some cases grown children with their own children, about those rules. So many times I heard from friends who were younger, maybe in their 30s, my parents want to see my kids, they want to see their grandkids, and I don't want my parents to get sick, and I am cutting them off from their grandchildren. So, what does it look like? So, I am heartened, before I take questions, I'm heartened to see what I call normal questions. People being like, why hasn't this person proposed to me yet? People being like, I'm thinking about my ex. Like, I love these questions right now because they're like, they're normal, right? I had a bad date questions. They're creeping back up. I'm also noticing that some of the new rituals we established for courtship in COVID are remaining. And I am this may be a controversial take, but Zoom dates forever. I think the number of times I have heard, particularly from a woman and some men in my life, I'm so glad it was canceled. Because like it's effort, right? To get to a bar, to have a drink, and sometimes a full dinner, and you get there and sometimes in 5 minutes like there's no chemistry, and then you sit there and to have that first interaction be on a device where then you can just shut it down. It's like you can be in your pajama pants and never have left, and then and there's no question about the economy of it, who pays. I mean, so many people lost jobs during this, and the idea that now dating is expensive, right? Going places is expensive. So to have these smaller interactions to decide, well, maybe it's okay if we just take a walk and no one has to buy a $50 drink and appetizer in Back Bay. And so these things seem to be sticking around, and I'm pretty excited about that because I think it makes dating more accessible and less overwhelming. I say this, usually I keep my personal life not a big secret. I will admit that when I first started Love Letters, the internet was young enough 12 years ago that I was like, no one will know who I am. I could be gay, I could be straight, I could, and then I was like, oh, they could just Google me. I'm clearly like who I am and much more easily found. But I was like, no one should know where the voice is coming from. Yet I kept my name. It wasn't like a pen name, but I have tried to keep myself out of the column, only dropping certain things in because I am the least interesting part of the column. Trust me, the commenters and the letter writers are the most important thing. But I don't know if any of you listen to podcasts, but I will pitch my own podcast, and I highly recommend listening because it is much more of the reporting that I was trained with combined with the Love Letters topic. So for every season, there's a topic. In 2018, we started with season 1, which was all about breakups and endings and the nice thing about doing a whole season about breakups, I remember that, people at the Globe said, can you do a whole season about breakup stories? And by the way, people tell their stories start to finish, and sometimes there are experts on with them or fun stories, but any breakup story has this like roller coaster ride where it's about a breakup. So it's going to go down, and then you get to see somebody rise like a phoenix because they always do. Our second season was about how to meet someone. Third was how do you know? And that was everything from how do you know this person is the person for you to how do you know when to leave. One of my favorite episodes from that season, the source I talked about, is about a chef who talks about when he knew he wanted to convert to Judaism because no one asked him to. He married a Jewish woman and he was like, I think I might convert to Judaism. And they were like, you don't have to do that. And he was like, oh, no, I'm going to do that. And he talks about why. And it's really interesting. We did season 4 and 5 out of my basement, which changed things quite a bit, but it sounds just as good. Season 4, I'm forgetting the topic, but my gosh, it was like, it was a very pandemic focused situation. Season 5 was about new beginnings, which I thought was really an appropriate thing to talk about as we were sort of coming into the vaccine era. Season 6 starts in a month and it's about breaking the rules. And already the stories are really, 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 really good. One of my favorites is a guy who every single person in his family has been divorced at least once. And I'm talking cousins, second cousins. So he's like, the rule in his family is you will get divorced. And he's just sitting there with his wife, like, what, like, so he decided to do a family investigation to allow himself to relax, to see if there was, he said, I wanted to know if I had a divorce gene. And it's really great. And the very first episode will, for those who read the Globe, Kimberly Atkins in our opinion section, you may have also seen on MSNBC and many other outlets, you may have noticed she became Kimberly Atkins Store fairly recently. She is in her late 40s. She decided to change her name when she got married for the first time. Even I was like, now at this age, in this economy, and she talks about how doing something more traditional was actually breaking the rules and the aftermath of that and why she made that choice. So now I've gotten myself on a tangent about podcast, but anyway, I've lost track of why I originally brought it up. But I will say that season 4, episode 1 is an episode about one of these pandemic couples. So you might get a kick out of that. And I actually haven't checked in to see how they're doing, but oh, I remember why I was telling you. Sorry. This is the brain of someone who hasn't been in public for a very long time. In the last episode of season 6, or season 5, this most recent episode, I confess that for the first time during the pandemic, I allowed my own profile to be on an app. So usually I've always swiped for friends, and it was sort of on a dare. A friend going through a breakup said, I won't go back online unless you do too. And I was like, the only time it feels like something I would want to do is in a pandemic where I can't go anywhere. The stakes are incredibly low. And it was very interesting because, these are worlds I'm immersed in with a space between myself and those worlds as a journalist. And, I am a single person who really likes being single and hasn't thought much about, like I never had the deadlines for myself for marriage and children, which can make a person pretty lazy. Right. And my late mother was always sort of, like go do whatever you want to do. There was absolutely no pressure to do this, but it was interesting. And I think that so much of what I liked about it, I don't know if it would have existed before the pandemic. The way people talk to each other, the suggestions they had for meeting up, people getting to the point, people saying, I'm only here for this, so you got to be open to this in this world right now. And other people talking about their loneliness. I had some Zoom interactions that were really fascinating. And anyway, I have left the process with a lot more feeling like that this experience might have, allowed for more transparency and hope, I think, after this. So anyway, I've gone on for too long. I want to take your questions because I know you have good questions. And Zoom people, I'm looking at you like I should be looking straight ahead because you're right in front of me, right? Please drop questions. You were no less important, even though you're not here. It's okay. I feel your energy. So does anyone want to start? And this can be about, you can ask about the Globe in general for the past year. You can ask about love letters, the column. Also, I will say that I did release a young adult book at the start of the pandemic, which I learned how beautiful it is to release a book online because all my book events were in pajamas. But it is a book. It's a book very much rooted in my reality of, it's really a young adult book. I put that in quotes. It's a young person's view of all the adults in her life and their relationships with each other. And it was inspired by when my mom died, she wanted to be cremated, which is not a Jewish thing to do. And which I kind of knew, and it became a controversy in my family with the more religious members of the family, but it was her wishes. And my sister, my Aunt Nancy, who keeps kosher and probably was screaming on the inside, and a friend of the family went to a very Irish Catholic West Roxbury funeral home, and we're literally like, where are we? And this is weird. And couldn't stop giggling, probably because we were sleep deprived, and wound up bringing my mom's ashes to various gardens. And so this is a book about a Jewish high schooler who does this for her grandmother. And it sort of talks a little bit about sort of, when you're a more secular Jewish person, what does that mean? But more than that is a Massachusetts story about going to really cool gardens, one of which is at the Mount in Lenox, the Edith Wharton House. One is the Arboretum. But I like to do a thing where I bring a book and give it to somebody whose birthday is today or closest to today. So we might have to fight for that. And I'm counting the people on Zoom, and I'm absolutely happy to mail. So we're going to have to figure that out at the end. But so you can ask me about the book. You can ask me about love letters. You can ask me about the Globe. Anything is up for grabs. Yeah, I mean, I think that, this is, again, you're talking to a reporter and a writer and not a psychologist. So take this with a grain of salt. But I think our minds like to believe in normal and returning to it in all parts of our lives, even pre-pandemic, right? Like that there is a default mode that we can get to where we feel safe and comfortable. And I think the bottom line is people, and we talk about new normal, right? A lot, you hear that phrase about like maybe somebody gets divorced and there is a new normal. And that's true, but these new normals never last for long. So I think that when I say that, I mean, I will never see my social life, my family life in the same way. I will never see distance in the same way. It would be very weird to say, do you want to have a Zoom date in 2019? That's never going to seem weird ever again. So it's just that we are forever shifting, and it's not as though even if Delta had not existed, we wouldn't have gotten vaccines and become who we once were. The workplace has changed too much. The way we interact with the outdoors has changed too much. I am someone with all of the allergies in the world, and I love to be outside now, right? I notice trees, right? These are things that, it's even like this happens a lot with grief, where you lose someone important to you and you see the world quite differently through that lens. And I think we have experienced a collective grief and a collective change in individual ways where if the expectation, and if you're feeling hard on yourself or bad about yourself for, well, wow, I used to be able to go to 3 things or call 3 people and it wasn't draining. Why I hear this a lot. I'm so tired. This feels I'm drained from the smallest thing. That's okay. Like maybe you were drained before and didn't know it. I realized pretty soon into the pandemic that I'd been dehydrated for like 15 years. I started drinking water all day because it was right next to me, and I was a big Diet Coke drinker at the Globe. And I felt better and I slept better. And this was just not something I noticed, right? So that's sort of what I mean, which is I think there's a lot of pressure to become who we were and to shoulder what we did. And accepting that the experiences were lost. One of the things that I've been surprised about is seeing my friends' kids in person and realizing how much they've grown in this time, right? Like some of them are completely different people, they look like, and we just move on. We can't rewind. We move on from here. And I think that I was in a mode before this of, well, when everything restarts, and the truth of the matter is it never stopped, right? So that's sort of what I mean. I think being kind to yourself in accepting that how you feel now is now. It doesn't revert back to February 2020, nor should it. And I think that's okay. It changes how we place expectations on ourselves and how we, I think, deal with whatever our lives are now. Mhm. Well, I definitely think, and I'm certainly not the expert to talk about, diversity and inclusion and why certain things happened. I mean, I think there are historians that can speak to how COVID, even just everybody being at home, not everybody, some people being at home. I don't know if anybody has a little glass of water. I'm just a little, but in my, this is a perfect time to, yeah, it's all right. It's an allergy day, but yeah, it's all, and it was on its way, right? There were so many interesting conversations when the vaccine came out in my communities about, I have a lot of theories, and a lot of them are probably not true, about people who were running to vaccines and people who were scared of them. And I'm not talking about anti-vaxxers. I'm talking about people who, Black friends of mine who were like, listen, historically, there's a lot of testing, like understanding that history and which is not to say those friends didn't embrace the vaccines because they ran to get them with me, but putting that into context. And I think for a lot of white people, they never thought about it that much, right? The inequities became so clear. Embarrassment for wealth, or for not just wealth, but for amenities, right? I had a woman I work with whisper into the phone to me, I still have my nanny. And you would have thought she was confessing that she did a crime, right? So I think there was a lot of light shed on, if we're going to reset life, if we're going to rethink how we do things, let's look at everything, because it's not working, right? It's not working. And it is, right now, the newsroom of the Globe continues to look better and better. There was a moment early in the pandemic where I looked at that newsroom screen of all those boxes and I was like, wow, what a lot of white people. And it didn't look like, it looked like that a little bit when I got hired, but because the staff had shrunk quite a bit, just less people, but it was like the demographic it shifted in the wrong direction. And there was a thoughtfulness about this newsroom should look like the communities it covers, right? And that includes and also, what does it mean to be, a reporter, and objectivity? And does that mean we both sides the vaccine? Does that mean, what does this mean, right? So there were incredibly wonderful conversations had at the Globe that I'd never had before. And I think that's just a microcosm of what was happening in the world. So yeah, good intellectual question, but yeah, it is a time when everybody was like, what is happening? And what, and let's embrace our discomfort. Oh, hello, friends. Okay, I have a son in Chicago in his mid-20s. For a lot of his group, the pandemic is over, at least enough. They're vaccinated and not afraid of getting a breakthrough. Is this typical? How does this square with your calm experience? Totally. I'm going to generalize big time, so please do not be offended, but younger friends, and for that reason, they have reason to feel healthier, because they literally are healthier than I woke up this morning and I was like, my back, and that's whatever. And I also feel like I have much older friends, and I'm talking friends in their 70s, right? And for whatever reason, in my particular life, those two ends of the spectrum are the most likely to be like, I'm going to go have dinner indoors. I have some theories about that, in that because people over 75 were the first to get vaccinated here, and Fauci was like, go live your life. It was my older friends, one particular for me, that was like, we're going to do this because Fauci said we can, but she had already gotten used to what it felt like to return to some of the social activities she had done. It's a really confusing time right now, because I'm not where I was last year, but I am like, there's a part of me that's like, you're going to a Harry Styles concert? Like, what is wrong with, like, is it that important? So yeah, I'm seeing this, but I'm seeing it not just, there are a lot of people in their early 20s who are not feeling that way. So I think it's just across the board. Some people are over it. Some people are over it at different levels. And I saw a person I work with walking into a bar last night in Jamaica Plain who last year was like, saw me from like 40 feet away and was like threw a bottle of hand sanitizer at me. So like, I'm like, she's going in that bar. So I think it's just really confusing. Um, and I think people are also accepting that this isn't, it's not like in 6 months it's gone. So how do we live? What are the, my literary agent calls it risk chips. She says, I have risk chips and I know where I am willing to play them. And they might not be the same places that you are. So I think we're going to have to make peace with each other's risk chips and set our boundaries accordingly. So I'm one of the women who met their boyfriend during COVID. One of our ongoing discussions is when we are comfortable eating in restaurants and going on airplanes. We are not in agreement yet. I'm sure that married couples are having the same kinds of conversations. What advice do you have for us? So yeah, you're not the only ones. I my instinct is to say that sometimes it helps to have a third party. My high school boyfriend, my first boyfriend, is basically a pharmacologist and immunologist. And I have this rule where I'm like, well, we're calling Kyle, and poor Kyle is probably called by everybody, where I'm like, do you think I'm allowed to? And of course, we all have that person in our life, right? Like maybe a nurse we once knew, where it's like, tell me if I'm going to be okay, right? And so sometimes it helps to, even if it's a friend, state your worries and intentions out loud. I had a friend the other day say to me, you went to a salad bar? And I was like, but I had a mask on. Everybody had a mask on, but they're like, oh my God. Like we all have different things, right? So I generally think that if someone is truly uncomfortable, you have to kind of, for the most part, often it reverts to the person who has greater boundaries, where you can go on the plane alone if you want to, but if the other person does not want to go on a plane, it's just not going to work and it's not going to be fun. So I think that it's also, well, usually there is a compromise, right? It means not going to the Bahamas and it means driving somewhere, like there are ways around this, but I think what's important is to accept that lines are there, that you can't force someone else to cross them, and that the lines will shift. And what is so annoying, but so unbelievably true right now, is that everything will seem hypocritical. The fact that I went to a salad bar and I'm seeing Harry Styles tomorrow, but I will in my mind shame I'll be like, oh, look at you going into that bar. None of it makes sense. And for right now, it's something we're gonna have to live with. So forgiving each other at the start, but I also think it really helps to have a friend there. Talking about older, my husband and I are in our 90s and have been eating out since it was first allowed, doing the gym the same, fully vaccinated, follow the rules of the day, and live each day because that is all we really have. Bless you, Cynthia Atkins. Yes. I had a college student the other day tell me that she went to a Pitbull concert in Miami, where people were literally like, it was outside, but she said she's short, she's packed in like sardines, mouthed them, everybody's on top of each other. She said, I didn't get a COVID breakthrough case there. I got a COVID breakthrough case by going to my vaccinated friend's house at college. She said, so you do your best. And I talked to her while she works for my college newspaper. She was in quarantine. She keeps kosher, and they were like constantly screwing up the food they were sending to her door. She's like, I can't eat this. And they'd come back. But anyway, that part of it is also true. We're just doing our best. Oh, yes, I can repeat. So the question, yeah, okay, I will do my best to repeat the questions. Anybody else in the room? In the back? Oh, sure. Or I can repeat the question.
You mentioned that in your podcast, one of the podcasts was about, is this the right person, given that we're together 24 hours a day? Have you seen a increase in domestic relationship problems, abuse, that sort of thing, with people finally leaving and not being there to attend to the needs of the person who might want those attentions?
So to repeat, and correct me if I'm wrong with the question was about, have I seen more people dealing with domestic abuse and sort of how that has played out during COVID and how they're able to leave or not leave. I mean, one of the biggest, it was a huge concern, especially at the start of COVID during lockdown, which is what if you're locked down with a person who makes you feel unsafe? And there was an incredible amount of outreach done from domestic, violence support groups around Boston. Like I immediately saw a lot of language about, especially if, where do you go, right? Where do you go? So I should commend those organizations to begin with. It's a little too soon to know exactly how the numbers changed. And I can't speak to them, but I would say that one of the first things I checked into, this was more, and I think we talked about this last year, was what are the numbers going to be for leaving and staying, and divorce, because China's divorce numbers went up really quickly, but it's a false number. In fact, I have a bunch of people in my life who were set to have divorces at the start of COVID, and they've been like punted, and the can gets kicked every 3 months because there were so many people who lost their court dates, and they're all in the pipeline. And some people got their divorce over Zoom, right? But because some of these services have mechanisms for online help and filing things online and having legal representation online, that made things easier too. So we will see a massive divorce spike, but it's not necessarily people who wouldn't have been. Some of it is just that we're backlogged, and other times it's because we will also see a wedding spike for the same reason. And I think we will, based on what sociologists are telling me, we're going to see a spike in literally everything. Like anybody who ever wanted to do anything is like carpe diem, right? They're like, and I get that. So I think similarly, there were ways in which I saw more worry and cause for concern. And then there were new services that had never been there to begin with. So, yeah, but we're still seeing how that's going to look. The Hufflepuff in the corner. Yeah. Yeah.
So my question is less about the romantic relationships and more about the friendships. So did you see, because of COVID, people writing in talking about reconnecting with people that they lost contact with? So like for me, I had lost contact with a good friend from college, just a couple years out of college. We just got busy. But because of COVID, we moved, or my sister and I moved a knitting group or crafting group online onto Zoom. And so we had people from all over the country joining the crafting group instead of just our local friends. And partway through the summer, my friend from college rejoined the group, and we've been texting more. We've been seeing each other on the group, and it's been wonderful to have that contact again. So is that more common now?
Yeah, it's okay. For those who didn't hear, and I think you probably did, the question was about friendships and reconnecting. So there was this great thing that happened, right? Especially I think among single people, where people that you might have not had time to truly reach out to, people far away, well, suddenly it didn't matter. Everybody was far away. So yeah, I had a similar thing where my college friends were on Zoom. There was an app people started downloading called House Party. I see it on all my friends' phones now, where for like 4 weeks of my life, it was like house party, house party, house party. And after a while, I was like, actually, I don't need to play the games anymore. I just want, and then there was Zoom fatigue, right, with friends. My family did a lot of locally. It was like, I remember last year on Father's Day, it's like we all got online, we're sitting there staring at each other. And one of my cousins was like, this is it, I'm done. Right. Where in the beginning it was, but at a normal table, you like somebody goes to the bathroom, you walk around, you pair off with somebody. And so I think for families that became also exhausting while lovely, but with friends, a lot of people reaching out to people they hadn't seen in years. I do believe it was the Festival of Exes reaching out. And actually for a while, I was like, where are mine? What's wrong? Right. And I don't count my high school boyfriend. That doesn't count. Right. And then finally one showed up, and I was like, now I feel part of the experience. So thank you so much. But yeah, that's been a great thing. I think the only negative, and I hate to flip this negative at all, is that many of us formed these circles during COVID of here are my people. Here are the people I actually see. Here are the people I talk to most. And they were not necessarily the people that would have been that circle before. So I didn't bubble with anybody, but I had one friend who also worked from home who was single, and she doesn't have laundry machines in her building. And I was desperately afraid of her. My Harry Styles friend. I was worried about her going to a laundromat. So every 2 weeks I would pick up her laundry and I would do it, which also gave me a feeling that I had done a thing, right? Like I was like, this is the day I do the laundry. So it was part of a routine. And we only bubbled in the same house 2 nights. That's how afraid we were. Thanksgiving and New Year's, because we didn't want to risk our families. And we got weird. To go back to the topic, since the world has opened up a bit more, there was a point at which she and I, that was like, we were responsible for knowing the other person was alive, and my sister was too, but she was my local person. And so we have still been like, where I'll be like, is it weird that I don't know where she is? Right. There's this sort of codependency of, and we're feeling left out of like, wait, should I, but she's my bubble person, right? Similarly, there's a former intern at the Globe who's now in her mid-20s who was kind of stuck with her parents, and she and I began. And her parents are lovely. She wasn't stuck. I shouldn't have said that, but she was far from friends, and inside, and also high risk. And we would watch TV online together, and some of those nights watching TV with a 25-year-old and trying to explain like why moonlighting was important and things like that. And her explaining to me why reboots are, she was like, made me watch the Point Break reboot and was like, just do this with me. Like, it's important to me. Right. And I was like, no. But they were some of the best nights of my last year and a half. And so this 25-year-old is going to reemerge into the world and have a life, as will I. Right. And so this is like this camp friendship, and how does it evolve? Right. So what are the healthy ways it can evolve? So I think it's both sides. I think it's, yes, we reconnected with so many people, and now we're like, who am I even seeing? And what am I doing? And so it's confusing. It's confusing. Going back to the lack of normal, it's like, I don't know. One of my best friends might be a 25-year-old who is 20 years younger than me, and I could have like made her, but you know what I mean? But she gets it, right? And so it's weird. It's weird. Yeah. And I'll repeat the question. Yeah. Okay, that's a great question. Is there a group or informal group of advice columnists, and I mean, I think the question is, what does it mean to be an advice columnist in Boston versus nationally? So in some ways, everything's national because of the way things work, right? The listeners of the podcast specifically are very national. They understand I'm rooted in Boston, but it's almost like I'm a character who's in Boston, who's coming to you live from Boston, right? Or not live, but there is no official group. But a lot of us know each other. One of my great pleasures this year was launching the book of John Paul Brammer, who writes an advice column called Hola Papi. And I believe he's from Oklahoma. He is gay. He is an advice columnist. He is those advice columns that he writes, which Hola Papi is an advice column that has made me cry multiple times, because often he allows for his own stories he's the only advice column I know where like, whenever he talks about himself, I'm like, tell me more, like make this about you. And he wrote a book that came out this year, and I moderated that launch with Brookline Booksmith. And so like, I like an empathetic advice column. So he's, to me, all empathy. The person who's now doing Dear Prudence at Slate, also amazing, right? Like, there are people I truly admire. Actually, there's really no one at the moment who I think is, like, there were some snarkier advice columns back in the day. And I think we're just in a place of understanding that a lot of people write to advice columns because they really need help. And I just wrote a big story for the Globe about how there's a massive therapist shortage with hours. So like, people are really seeking help wherever they can get it. So to treat them as a joke is not great, especially right now. So, and you kind of get ushered in. Like, I always tell the story of Margot Howard, whose mother was Ann Landers. Like, Margot lived in Boston for years, and she sort of summoned me to the Charles Hotel when I started the column, and was sort of like, like, and she's a great friend, who's, in her 80s. So I do think it's an interesting world. We don't all know each other, but we know of each other. And I think we all know what a weird job it is. But I will say this about doing it in Boston. Every now and then I wonder how the letters would be different if we didn't have seasons. Like I do get letters from California and other places, but the seasons so much affect our cycles of relationships here. And the fact that most people, when they break up, it is when the weather gets nice. That's like a New England thing, right? It's like, oh, I can leave the house again, right? Other people are attractive, and I've been snowed in for 6, like that's not a California problem. So that's different. But sometimes if I get a letter that the question was, do I ever have to refer cases out? If something is above my pay grade, I say it, like you need to, right? Oh, I'm more likely these days, as I mentioned in this recent news story, to call some professionals. Casa Myrna in Boston and Jane Doe, like all of these places, especially for domestic, if somebody writes to me and I think they might be in danger, I don't even know if I should email them back sometimes because I don't want to put them in danger, right? So I am less frequently than I would have believed at the beginning in need of seeking that sort of advice. There's a question that I'll probably run this week about someone sort of being harassed by an ex, somebody who left their wife for a much younger person. And whenever he posts about the new person, there's a lot of "you terrible person." So that was like, I got to call a lawyer about that. It's like sometimes yes, but a lot of times it's just, with your gut. The question was about how to decide what letters go into the paper. So it's kind of like what I get. There's sort of 2 buckets, like run and can run, right? Well, there's a lot of the don't run is like they're like one sentence, people that don't understand, and I'll write back to them. Can you tell me a little bit more? Like, can you, this is not a sex column, right? So like sometimes I get lovely letters, but I'm like, you know what? I don't know that I'm qualified to answer this question. Or sometimes I'm like, I don't even know what that is. Or the Globe, that's not what they're looking for, right? So that's going to go in the no bucket. I don't answer questions from teenagers no one under 18 needs to be, maybe 70. Like I don't, if a 13-year-old, and I get a lot of letters from kids because they're getting their parents' print paper in some cases. And they're like, oh, this is near the whatever, the comics, whatever, however they're finding it. I would never write back. I mean, I'm not even in a position to say like, go talk to your parents, because I don't know their parents. Like maybe don't talk to your parents. So but the ones in the yes bucket, I try to answer them in the order that they come in. I try to go for variety, but the process is not as complicated as it might, seem. The question is, are there times I get nothing? Yeah, there are slower times, and I think that's weather too in some cases, or life, like when everybody, usually like January is heavy. Like, when people are feeling pressure based on holidays, when that's passed, when people return to routines like school, change breeds questions. And so, I'm more likely to get letters at the start of a season in more quantity. The very beginning of COVID, it was like all like, do I have to wait the 2 weeks to see my boy? I mean, they were like clinical questions that I was like, I'm not Dr. Fauci. I do not know. But it, COVID has really messed with the cycle I used to see of what was a slow day and what was a fast day and what was a breakup month and what was a not breakup month. And, it's a little bit, time is a lot more. I spent the last 2 days before this in Bristol, Connecticut, and at one point saw the Watch and Clock Museum. Highly recommend if you're into clocks. And every clock in there, like most clocks, had nothing was set. And I was like, this is like a metaphor for the last few years of my life where I'm like, who knows? So I think that's sort of what the column feels like a little bit too. The question was about, do I have to be concerned about liability? I mean, I have to be responsible, and I want to be responsible. I think the greater concern than liability, because I'm not the kind of advice columnist who's going to tell someone to go out and, I'm very rarely, if you take a good look at telling people to go do a thing, I'm more asking them to ask themselves particular questions about their intentions. I think when there's concern, it's often in the reverse. Being a woman on the internet is weird. And it's more a question of what does being public, and when I say public, like I'm not, it's not like I host Chronicle, right? Like there are people who are recognizable in Boston, right? Or beyond. I'm not that, but I will tell you that when I went on that dating app and I went with half of my first name, it was Mere, and I got a lot of messages, and it just said writer, it didn't say the Globe. I got messages that were like, "Hey, I read your column," and so I had a range of emotions about that. One, I felt very unsafe, and I was like, "What they're telling me is you're not telling me who you are, but I'm telling you I know who you are," right? But then I'd be like, wait, that's not their intention. They're trying to be complimentary. Like these men are trying to say like, hey, I recognize you and appreciate what you do. And they're not going to see it as I know where you live, right? Which is how I took it because of other problems, right, on the internet. And then my third feeling was, okay, if these people know who I am, why don't I get paid more? But that was my, like if I'm so popular, but I think it's when you are a person, a woman, especially a woman of color, which I'm not, but like, and you have opinions at all, and they are out there, that's something the Globe thinks about a lot is who is at risk of harassment and that kind of thing. So I'm selfishly thinking about that more than I am thinking, because I'm really, really, really trying to be careful. There's only so much I can control because I don't know intimately these people on the other end, but I think about that too. Like, what am I saying? And how is this person going to take it? And how can I be helpful, responsible, and thoughtful, knowing it could be taken in many different ways? So yeah, but great question. Anything else? I mean, you guys are great. It's so great to be here in person. It's so great to be here on, keep looking the wrong way, on Zoom with all of you. Can we figure out who the birthday is? I'm looking. Like, I mean, you kind of know if you're like, oh, well, that might, can anybody beat that on Zoom? Can anybody beat closer to today than November 11th? 4th, I'm sorry, November 4th. That's like election. I don't know why. I'm seeing nods, but I don't know. Write it in the chat. If you've got that birthday, you may have just won yourself a young adult novel about gardens. And I will tell you that this is do not feel like this is for young adult or young adult women. It is for everyone. So I think it's for everyone. All right. Thank you guys so much. This was a pleasure to be here. I'll be thinking about you tomorrow with Harry Styles.
Thank you very much, Meredith, for joining us. And we just have a small token of appreciation.
It looks like I'm getting a book too. So thank you so much.